I'd like to invite Professor Elias Fereres from the Institute of Sustainable Agriculture at the University of Cordoba in Spain. Professor Fereres he's working mainly around water-limited agriculture and the role of water in agriculture and the environment. He's currently the chief editor of the journal Irrigation Science and is going to present us a talk on irrigation strategies coupled with genotypes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. This work has been carried out with my old friend and colleague Pasquale Seduto, and I've also have had the luck of my postdoc Monica Espadafor helping me with this. Well, I'm bringing you the irrigation perspective to the drought. I guess I can summarize the news from the irrigation front that there is also a drought in irrigation, and there will be more of a drought in the future. The world irrigated area is concentrated in this continent, in Asia, as you can see there. Some is North America, expanding in Brazil, and a potential for some expansion, but not nearly as much as has been in Asia, in the continent that looks lighter in Africa. I don't have to remind you that irrigation is a fairly complex set of activities that interface many disciplines. There are three pillars: engineering, agronomy, and the social sciences. And there are a number of activities, as you can see there. I will not go into that. But this is to illustrate that we are dealing with a fairly complex operation, which goals that are not always coincidental between farmers and society, but the aim is to obtain the maximum benefits for both farmers and society in the use of this practice. Now, at present, after the big expansion in the second half of the 20th century, there are about 300 million hectares in the world equipped for irrigation. Still, the majority, about 70%, is under surface irrigation. And the situation is that you require quite a bit of capital cost to develop lands for irrigation, that at present there are significant difficulties to expand irrigation any further, mostly from the economic and also the ecological limitations. The irrigation has a history of low efficiency, and this is why there are perceptions everywhere, but particularly urban societies and by decision makers, that irrigation wastes water. And this is very important in looking at what is happening now. And what is happening now in response to this perception of waste is there is a big trend in irrigation modernization. Basically going from surface irrigation into pressurized systems, either sprinklers or drip, and increasing both the investment in capital and the energy requirements of these new pressurized systems. And this increase in capital costs leads to the more or less the paradigm that had existed until now, is that since you're going to invest so much in the development of irrigation, you should try to reach the maximum production possible, and therefore you should meet fully the crop evapotranspiration requirements. This has been the case. However, what happens when we don't have enough water? This is a picture of a lake that was famous a few weeks ago, not because it didn't have the water, as you can see. This picture was taken about a year ago. But this dam was about to go because of an excess water from the rains that they have had this year. But this picture is occurring more and more frequently in many of the irrigated areas of the world. So looking at the future and summarizing the broad aspects of irrigation as they relate to this talk, it is pretty likely that there will be more water scarcity in the future, mostly because regardless of the climatic trends that are uncertain, the pressure from other sectors of society are increasing and diminishing the amount of irrigated water. This is a very important point that is overlooked. All these modernization efforts will not save water. What has been known from the millions of hectares that have already been modernized is that the consumptive use of water doesn't decrease, it goes up or stays the same. And that means, and if there is any water left after modernization, is taken by the users that legally have access to it. So we cannot count on new water coming from modernizing further our irrigation systems, still 70% traditionally surface irrigation. We also have to remember that in times of scarcity, the same way that the groundwater is the bank for irrigated agriculture is the bank for society for water, and the water will be taken away from agriculture and given to other sectors, including the environment in times of crisis. And because of climate changes and others, there will be major uncertainties in water supply. In this future scenario, there are two things that we need to get done. The first one is we must set the sustainable limits of water consumption, for which we need much better accounting than what we have now. Those efforts are pretty much required. The other thing we need to do is to make the best use of every drop of water we have, following the lines of the concept developed by Abraham Bloom in his paper on efficient use of water. So, in order to do that, we need to know as best we can the relation between irrigation and yield. And there are two different ways you can do that. You can learn that, as we've been doing for many, many years, empirically determining, measuring yield and water use and determining what we call the production function. This is one last effort on developing a production function empirically. And this was a 5-year experiment, 10 different treatments, 8 replicate plots per treatment to develop what you see there, which is a response of almond production to amount of water applied in the southern San Joaquin Valley, which is pretty much equivalent to evapotranspiration up to some point because there is hardly any rainfall, and the soils where we did the experiment are very shallow and have hardly any storage capacity. So if you take the derivative of this curve, you get what is called the marginal water productivity, the kilograms per cubic meter of irrigation water. And you have a function of this nature at which at one point the marginal water productivity is 0 and goes into negative when you use more water than required, but then it goes up to an optimum, a maximum amount, which will give you the optimum amount of water if your aim is to obtain the maximum water productivity. You are aiming for maximum production, you should be somewhere around here, where you would be getting the maximum yields. Now, if you know the price of the product, if you know the price of almonds, you can come up with what's the value of a cubic meter of water in terms of dollars, which goes up to about 2.3 or so, in this case, with the prices that were in 2015. And this information allows the farmers to decide how much should they pay for water. During the drought of 2015, some farmers in this area asked the question, Should we pay $1 per cubic meter of water? The answer with this information is yes, because you're going to get 2 if you are in this water supply level. Now, this is done for trees because we don't really have good simulation models of tree performance in relation to water. They're being built, and we will have them in the forthcoming years. For annual crops, the situation is different. We have more information developed in the past, and we can solve the problem of optimizing the irrigation water use in annual crops. In this particular example of 4 crops, we developed an optimization system in which the model, the economic model with the information supplied from simulation models of crop water use, provided not only the area that should be grown for each crop in the farm, but the amount of water that should be allocated to each of the farm or each of the different crops in the farm. And to do that, you need basically the simulation of yield response to water, an economic optimization model, and then do a number of scenario analysis on the basis of farm prices and production costs and whatnot. And so we can handle now, with the information that we have, with the annual crops, the optimization of irrigation water when water is limited. Now, the issue of this talk, which I will then tackle and devote the rest of it, is what is the role of the genotypes when we develop irrigation strategies. So I did that by using a simulation model. And as anybody that uses a model, I should use a disclaimer. I find this a very good disclaimer by an unexpected person. Farming is easy if you are 1,000 miles away from the field and your plow is a pencil. I was several thousand miles from the field that I simulated, because I simulated Patancheru. And I didn't use a pencil, but I used a computer, which is the modern pencil of today. I assumed that General Eisenhower was related to a farming background, but I found this friend of mine, found it some time ago, and I think it's a good issue to as a reality check. So what I've done is to simulate sorghum production in Patancheru, for which I have used the climate data set that I should thank ICRISAT for having it available in their website. And the simulation is of a hybrid sorghum. I did it in the Rabi season when there is only 10% of the annual rainfall of this site occurs during the season, so it's the simplest case you can find. And planting date was 15 October, and the average of the simulation of the 38 years, is 10.6 tons per hectare. This is under full water supply, no limitations, no nutrient limitations, no other kinds of limitations there. Yield that the model aqua crop that I use in its last version, that's still not released, will provide. The way I will present all the data is using these plots that you're probably familiar with. I will explain what they are. You have the yield here from the lowest to the highest value of the 38. And this is accumulated as cumulative probability. The way you read these graphs is if you go to the 0.3 or 30% probability, you get a certain yield value. And at that level of 30%, you would get a higher value of 10.2 of yield, 7 out of the 10 years, or less than that, 3 out of the 10 years. So you can decide what will be your yield at certain level of probability, or what will be the yield exceeding after that level of probability. I hypothesized 2 different soils. They are not the ICRISAT soils. One is a shallow soil with a relatively high water holding capacity. The important thing here is the plant available water. In one case was 84 millimeters, which I consider low. and a moderate level of 120 millimeters of plant and available water. This will be called soil 1 is the low water holding capacity, and soil 2 is the higher moderate water holding capacity. The first exercise is the importance of timing when you are very short of water. The full irrigation demand in this location in that season is about 350 millimeters net water requirements. Well, I assume that we only had 70 millimeters to apply it. And you can see here the importance of timing in soil 1. If you apply that irrigation 53 days after planting, or 63 or 73, you have the yield distribution. Here, the best one is the red one, or 63, that gives you 3.1 tons per hectare. The soils started fully charged from the monsoonal rains every year. I assume that. And you can see that how critical it is to have the right timing of that single irrigation. 10-day delay will give you a reduction of more about 1 ton of yield on the average. And the delay had some years of very low yield. 30% of the years you get very low yields if you delay that single irrigation. This is in soil 1. Soil 2 have a different distribution now. And now the best timing is 73 days after planting. Because the yields are higher, of the order of 5 tons, there's less difference, but still a significant difference due to timing. So when you're very short of water, timing is the most critical factor, and you want to protect your harvest index from severe stress. So you have to match that to the water holding capacity of your soil and the anticipated rainfall, if there's going to be any. The next, so optimal timing varies with the soil plant available water, as you would expect. The next issue that I explored with the model was this idea of concentrating the water. If you have very little water, let's concentrate it on a smaller area. So I said, okay, let's simulate that the water I have 70 millimeters. I use it to apply 2 irrigations of 50 millimeters each instead of 1, but I do it only on 0.7 hectares. So I concentrate the water. When you do that in the soil of low water holding capacity, it pays. So 0.7 hectares yielded its total production. This is not yield now. This is total production, yielded 3.9 tons versus 3.1 tons of a single irrigation. So in this case, the concentration is positive. You grow less crops, you have to do the less area, you grow less area, you'll have to do the economics, but having more yield already in less area will result in even higher profits. But when you move to a different soil, the situation is not the same. Now, the single irrigation gives you, on the average, higher yields than the 2 irrigations. It's not that the 2 irrigations don't give you a higher yield, which is 7.7, which is more than 5.9. It's that the higher yield under these conditions in this particular soil is not enough to compensate for the loss of land where you concentrate the water. So in this case, it's negative. So this paradigm of concentrating the water in a smaller area is also crop, soil, and water supply dependent. So you cannot generalize that you should concentrate the water without exploring what the options are. Now, going into genotypes, when you have very limited water, after you choose what species you're going to grow, in this case we chose sorghum, the next decision is to define the length of the season of the cultivar that you're going to grow. And to illustrate this point, I chose 2 cultivars, a short season and a long season, and their maximum yields with no water limitation are simulated here. As you can see and expected, if the standard genotype yielded 10.6, the short season yields less, 9.8. The long season yields more, 11.1, because it's just longer season. Now, these are the expected results with full water supply. When you have a limited water supply, both from the irrigation and the soil water storage, the situation is different. Here you can see that in the first soil of low water holding capacity, the short season does best, is the green line, 3.6 on the average, and better response in the good years. Sorry. And the long season do worse than the standard, especially in the poor years. Now, in the better water holding capacity soil, we still have the short season is doing the best. Which, when I was doing the simulations, I was a little surprised. I'm not going to show the data, but I carried on simulating more and more irrigation water, and I found that the short season did better than the other two, up to 60% of the full water requirements. So choosing the season length under limited irrigation is not an easy task, because you can get some unexpected results depending on the situation in terms of your soil water storage and your water supply. In general, my feeling is short season cultivars do better when you have supplies that do not reach or cannot meet more than 60-70% of the water requirements. And long season need near full water supply to express their potential. So they should not be recommended. Now, season length is a relatively normal feature that you find in commercial cultivars, but since I was using the pencil or the computer and not doing the hard work that you guys do when you do breeding, I decided to design genotypes with my computer and see if I could improve on the standard commercial genotype that is calibrated in the model. So I developed two ideotypes based on my opinions on what what would be an improvement on the standard commercial genotypes. On the conservative genotype, I slowed down the canopy development by 10% and made it more sensitive to water deficits, moving the threshold for declining canopy soil water threshold from 0.2 to 0.15. I also made that the root system expansion would be slower, that the stomata will close earlier in the drying of the soil from 0.7 to 0.5 of plant available water, and also with a sharper response. And I also made that the new improved cultivar would have a higher rate of dry matter accumulation in the grain, so that the development of the harvest index will be faster. This is the conservative genotype. Now, what you would call the spender or the winner, I just wanted it to win, to be the best. I make it a faster canopy development than the standard genotype, faster root system expansion, higher rate of dry matter accumulation in the grain, and also the harvest index is more resistant to water deficit, it's less sensitive. I also included a feature that varieties like sorghum have, the stay grain. I extended the threshold for early senescence due to water stress from 0.75, which is what is calibrated for sorghum in the model, to 0.8. So what results did I get with the new improved genotypes? This is the response of the standard genotype This is the conservative, so it did better in this soil. And also the so-called winner, even though there was very limited water, it did better on the good years, about the same as the conservative, and worse in the bad years. In the other soil, however, the response was different. The conservative, now when there was more water available, did worse than the standard, and the expander did better in the good years, but much worse in the poor years. Now, if we look at the average numbers, in the first soil, the best one was the expander that had an average harvest index better than the standard, was able to maintain the higher harvest index and produce slightly more biomass, and therefore ended up with a higher yield. On the other soil, the response was different. The expander produced too much biomass and ran into trouble with a lower harvest index than the other two, and the standard produced more biomass than the conservative genotype, and therefore give you the highest yield. I guess the upshot of the exercise is that there is always one genotype that does best under a set of conditions of irrigation supply fixed and soil water holding capacity. And that genotype is the one that matches the available water and really fits the available water which is development. If you produce too much biomass or too little, then you don't take advantage of the conditions. Key of it, of course, is to maintain the harvest index as high as possible. So, to summarize, with a picture of one of the few places in Europe that can still be developed for irrigation. This is a remote valley in Albania, about the only place that is not irrigated now that could be in the Mediterranean. Conclusions are that under limited irrigation, preserving the harvest index is most important. And then the best strategy is, as you've done it for rain-fed agriculture, to match the production to the water available. And also, after all those exercises where I tested different features, all those traits have some value and therefore would be useful under some situations. But some traits are more useful than others. And I believe that traits related to reproductive development and maintaining reproductive development under drought are now the most relevant under also conditions of limited irrigation. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Fereres. Can we just take one quick question of clarification before we have our coffee?
In your simulations, with the shorter and longer cycle sorghum, did you change the sowing date so that both of them flower in the best possible window of time?
No, I didn't. I had always the same fixed 15 October sowing date, which is I read was the standard date of sorghum. So that would be one strategy to move your sowing date if you're going to plant. But in that season, when there is, the evaporative demand of the Rabi season here, for what I learned, is fairly constant, and there's hardly any rainfall. You would probably have no advantage by moving the date. But in other environments, you would. You're right.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've had three interesting talks, one by Dr. Victor Sadres, one by Dr. Esteban Yogabi, and Professor Fereres. So a round of applause for those three speakers. Thanks.